call me Bill.
Let me see. Okay. Firstly, you've got the slides, and I apologize that there are 23 plus the front plate, but the reason I set up these slides, because I'm only allowed 7, and that's what I'm going to present. The reason I set it up in so many slides is because I wanted to work through the logic of mindset agency theory and how it derives from metacybernetics. It's really, that's really a bit of a cheat by saying that, because I never thought of metacybernetics when I thought of mindset agency theory. And in fact, if we go back 20 years, when I started looking at Maruyama's Mindscape Theory, I was interested in that, and I thought there was a problem with Mindscape Theory. It's supposed to represent personality and how people operate, and how you can categorize different people from an epistemological approach. The difficulty was that Maruyama set up originally 5 mindscapes, and then he reduced it to 4. And he set up the different mindscapes from a sort of experiential investigation of his students that he taught. And he worked out that different people had different ways of thinking and different characteristics. And from that, he started to produce his mindscape theory. The problem was, if I were to come with the idea of making mindscapes, new mindscapes, because Maruyama said there are many, many mindscapes, but there are really 4 important ones, but anyone can generate more. If anyone can generate more, how do you do it? I was not in a position to be able to generate mindscapes. So what I needed to do is work out how it might be possible to do that. And so 20 years later, I found a way of doing it. It just so happens that metacybernetics came out of the pot that Mindscape agency theory created. So let's go to the first set of slides, the first slide. Okay, so metacybernetics is a general theory of higher order cybernetics, but it didn't really materialize until 2 years ago. And it's what you might think of as a general framework in which different theories can be generated. And I regard mindset agency theory as an exemplar, one particular theoretical model that emerges out of the more general metacybernetics. So below that, we've got complex situations, living systems, agency framework. You can read those slides. I'm not going to go through them. I went through them the last time we were together. But I think agency has 2 aspects at the bottom right-hand side. Let me see if I can, 1 second. It should be, okay, here we are, pointer. Down here, we've got an agencies internalize their perceived externality, enabling them to adapt through process of assimilation. So assimilation is what Dubois called weak anticipation. And then you have the process of accommodation, where those models become integrated into the system, and you end up with strong anticipation, so that when an agency responds to a context, that agency is actually doing so not with respect to the context, but with respect to the accommodated model, and that constitutes strong anticipation. And another aspect, which I just added to an hour ago, so you won't have this on your slides, personality, when it exists as part of agency, is a regulator with two interactive sub-agencies, and they are cognition and affect. So we've got Maruyama's Mindscape Theory, and the question was, how do we move towards the creation of something that is transparent? We need to find out how we can create mindscapes that enable some mechanism, so that we can point to some mechanism and say, this is how you can create a mindscape. Now, at that time, I did not know about Shalom Schwartz's work on values. And that was introduced to me by a colleague, Gerhard Fink, who works in Austria. And we've been working together for more than 12 years. We've published, I think there was a 5-year period when he told me we'd published 40 papers. So, and that was all on aspects of personality. So my interest was, how do you create something transparent that would enable you to generate mindscapes that are transparent and you can say are rigid, are adequately produced from a theoretical perspective, rather than guesswork or intuition or something else. Well, what we did is to take Shalom Schwartz's work, and his first interest was getting away from the idea that there are two situations
just on the Zoom on the Club of Remy. It is really good today. William Ruckmeyer and this guy Yolles is doing his presentation now. They are really on target and would be so excellent in our program. So anyway, we'll get back.
Okay. That's a good phrase.
Should I carry on?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So what Shalom Schwartz did, he did a survey, a value survey of 60,000 respondents, and he produced a very fine map of values, a value map, which eventually was separated into different strands. And we, Gerhard and I, took that work and in due course created a trait theory. Now, the traits actually are designed to be, to respond to the work of Shalom Schwartz. The originality, the origin of those traits actually came from Sorokin's work in sociocultural dynamics. Now, when I did my PhD under my professor at Lancaster, he was very keen on Sorokin's work, sociocultural dynamics, and for him, cultures change according to some sort of yin-yang principle. And he identified two forces. One was he called sensate, which is materialism, and the other was ideational, the idea or the spirit or something like that. And these two are in continual interaction. And he wrote a tract, 4 volumes, which began in 1939 and finished in about 42, He had 10 students working on it, PhD students, and produced a lot of empirical work which supported what he was doing. And my view was that approach would be perfect for a general trait approach, which could be used to represent personality. So in due course, after many years of working, we end up with this. Now, firstly, this is based on the work of Eric Schwartz, who I first heard in a lecture in 1994. And he produced the third-order cybernetics model, which I have since developed. Now, you can see from this model, here we have what I call a meta-meta system. Here is a meta system, and here is a system. So it's got 3 dimensions. Here we've got, let me see, where are we? Here we have internally a fractal of the model. And here we have autopoiesis or operative intelligence. And here we have figurative intelligence. These terms, intelligence, come from Piaget. And figurative intelligence was called, is really autogenesis, as called by Schwartz. And is another name for that is self-creation. So we've got self-creation here, and we've got self-production there. Now here, this is a very important component, because this creates an operative couple, and through that operative couple, you get self-production, and you get the possibility of self-organization, but this is kept stable through the personality cognitive system. If you get problems in this area, then you don't know if you're going to have stability in this area. And if you have instability here, you have no idea how the person is going to behave. These things here, the P's, are potentials of filters that may impact on the personality and change the way it operates. It could create difficulties, for instance, for coherent thought and therefore coherent action for an individual. So let me see. I'm not going to go through the text on the right. It's really designed to provide information for people who are looking at the slides without recognizing, without having the benefits of a talk. So, what are, here we have the traits. Now, I've talked to you about the cultural trait, which has a yin-yang dimensionality. And if we're going to have cultural traits that operate with yin-yang processes, then if we develop new traits, and a lot of personality theories, I may add, are trait theories. If we're going to have a cultural trait, which is a yin-yang, have 2 extrema that interact, then we have to have all the other traits being consistently like that. And it just beautifully worked out that Shalom Schwartz's work was consistent with what we wanted to do. So here are the traits. We have a cultural and social trait that refer to agency. And we have cognitive, figurative, and operative traits that refer to personality. And they have, each of them, the cultural trait, sensate ideational, social trait, patterning and dramatist. And each of these have properties or descriptions that are explained on the right-hand column of each polar type. So these dynamics are very important to personality, and it's occurring the interactions between the poles are working all the time. And at any time, individuals can change their personality, not necessarily dramatically, but it may occur in a minor way. Sorokin's work on sociocultural dynamics explained how large cultures change over millennia, but the smaller the mass of a population, the more quickly it's feasible that changes will occur. So I'm not going to go through this slide. I'll let you read that. The next step comes to, let's see where we are, cognition and affect mindset. So as I mentioned earlier, if we're talking about mindsets, and this is on the pile of slides, there's a hell of a lot between the last one and this one. This is slide 10. So I'm not going to go through all the ones in between because I'm only going through 7 slides. So mindsets, I changed the name from mindscapes to mindsets because the derivation was different. And I didn't want to use Maruyama's term in case there was confusion. So it just so happens that using Eric Schwartz's theory and setting that up in traits for personality and using Shalom Schwartz's data and his categorizations, we end up by being able to exactly duplicate Eric Schwartz, Maruyama's 4 mindscapes in virtually every detail. It just so happens that we're fortunate enough that we actually generate 8 rather than 4 mindsets. Now that is done transparently. So we don't have to guess at how we got to it. We don't have to be an intuitive whiz to work out how how to generate more mindsets. And in fact, these mindsets can interact. So you can couple mindsets together and make even more complex personalities. And essentially, there's almost an unlimited number of permutations or combinations you can have. Well, they won't be unlimited. Of mine, if you've got 16, well, hang on, there are 8 combinations, but that's of the cognition. You've also got 8 affect mindsets. And now Maruyama never discussed, he discussed affect or emotion, but he never considered affect mindsets. So we have here 16 different mindsets in total, which gives you a very potentially very complex picture of personality. And they're formed, each mindset is constructed through traits. And because we have personality as a fractal, we can talk about a mindset, which is a personality mindset, and we can also talk about the larger agency mindset. So the larger agency mindsets has 5 traits, I showed it to you in the last slide, and the personality has 3 traits. So another thing that this does is to honor what Shalom Schwartz did. He wanted to get away from the idea that there was individualists and collectivists. And he said, they're 2 general terms. That's why he originally started to do his value analysis. And he wanted to get rid of the idea of there are only these 2 camps. So what we found is that, in fact, we stick with individualism and collectivism, but in fact, there are many different types. There are variations of individualism and variations of collectivism. And I'll show you that in due course. And when it came to trying to understand, because all the time I've been trying, for more than 20 years, I've been trying to say, well, if personality is a regulator of behavior, how can you predict how someone is going to behave? And this has been what I've been aiming at all the time. So perhaps, I think it was 4 years ago, I worked with another colleague who assisted me. He did mainly the data analysis, but we worked out how we could take mindsets and set up identities. And from those identities, we can differentiate between personal and public identity. And personal identity is how a person really thinks they are, and public identity is what they project to the public. And we know from the literature on psychology, that when personal identity and public identity are different, the individual has psychological problems. This has been studied by people who are immigrants to one country and then pretend they're not what they are, and then they have certain problems that they have to deal with. So let's go on. I think probably running out of time, am I, Jason?
Almost.
So here we have a multiple identity model. I had to do a lot of work in generating this because the topic is so fragmented. So I ended up with, again, here's a fractal. Here's a fractal of the Schwarz's model, and here we have private, personal, and public. Again, this is your instrumental couple. Here's your operative or intelligence or autopoiesis with feedback, figurative intelligence or autogenesis. And the way in which you measure this is through mindscapes that have 3 traits. And the way you measure this is through mindscapes that have 5 traits. So let's move on quickly. So here we have a discussion of the mindset agency theory, or I call it MAT. And I'm not really going to go through this, but the way in which that was evaluated, when we worked out, you know, there's at the back of the book that we produced, there is a questionnaire, 80 questions, where you can do a deep analysis of a personality. And those questions are actually Shalom Schwarz's questions. But we didn't have the facility to go to people, and we wanted to do a study of Trump, for instance. We couldn't go to Donald Trump and say, hey, Donald, can you be so kind as to fill out this 80 question questionnaire for us so we can analyze you? So what we did, we used something that Klaus knows much more about than I do, and that is to use content analysis. So my colleague knows more, but he introduced that to me, and at that time I knew very little about it. So the result of doing that gives case examples. So here we have 2 case examples, and this is my last slide. In order to set this up, I have to differentiate between 2 things. The first is what my modeling does is to create an analytic diagnosis. I can point to my models and say, hey, there's a pathology here, there's a filter which is pathological to the personality, and from that, I can deduce certain things. Now, I can't point to an individual and say, you are therefore have a psychosis or whatever. What I can say is there is evidence from this analysis that this individual has personality issues that should be further studied by clinical diagnosis, or through a clinical diagnosis. So if we look at Trump, the clinical diagnosis we get from various psychologists. For instance, McAdams, Trump, the sister of, the niece of Donald Trump, Hart, various other authors. So he has feelings of inadequacy, vulnerability, inferiority, narcissism, functional deficit, psychosis, i.e. psychosis, a loss of connection with reality, and a psychopath. So I can't deduce that. What I can deduce is there is the analytic diagnosis deduces malevolent psychopathologies. In other words, there are problems in his autopoiesis and autogenesis, his intelligences, network intelligences, arising through an inability to maintain a stable cognitive trait through comfortable context. So what we find at the top here, he has a personal mindset of hierarchical populism, and that is led by embeddedness, which is essentially collectivism. And one of the slides you have differentiates between these, but I haven't shown it on because it's not part of the 7. And he has a public mindset of hierarchical individualism, which is led by intellectual autonomy, a form of individualism. This is a major contradiction. There's nothing in his personality that can actually help him bring these two together. So that explains why sometimes when he finds himself in uncomfortable contexts, those which are not those which don't bring him approval by others, he can fall to pieces. He can suggest maybe injecting yourself with bleach or whatever it was to whatever situation. So if we go to Theresa May, she has hierarchical populism, which is the same as Trump, but her other public mindset is a combination of hierarchical individualism and egalitarian individualism. Now, that is a very, very, very different situation from that of Trump. Her clinical diagnosis, if you go to the internet and look up what people are saying about her, says she's inflexible, repetitive, has aversion to change, impervious to reality, limited emotional range, unsympathetic, lacks empathy, and can be self-deceptive. But it's nothing to the degree that Trump has. And in fact, if you look at the analytic diagnosis, you can see that what can happen here, if she has an HI and she has an EI, where they link, where they are synergistic, then she works extremely well. So here, if we take the intellectual autonomy involving, for instance, social power, authority, and wealth, and embeddedness, equality, social justice, and honesty, where those things come together, so she becomes a whole person, and she can generate a really constructive and coherent personality. That is the difference in the analytic diagnosis between Trump and May. And that's the references on the last. The reason I've given a whole set of references in the last slide that I'm not showing is because a lot of this is newer newer than the book, because in order to try and explain better than I did in the book what's happening with Trump and May, I had to get additional references, which is what I did. So that's it. Thank you.
Oh,
Stop share. Okay. Right.
yes. Do you have already a ready-made instrumental survey questionnaire? that we can invite our members to try it?
I'd love to send it to you. In fact, I think you have a copy of
I'm
the.
curious if I would like to try it or would like to.
No, you have an e-copy of my book that's coming out, I think, in the next couple of weeks, and it's at the back. It's in the appendix 1.
Okay. So do you want to organize a survey to our members for their at a voluntary participation basis?
Sorry, I can't hear you so well.
I mean, do you like to lead a survey among our members, whoever interested?
I don't like doing surveys. I'm not very good at analysis because I never engage in it. In fact,
you have to try your.
I know. I know.
Challenge.
Gerhard Fink has a lot of experience in doing surveys like this. I suppose we could try to do something. I think the idea of a narrative analysis, actually the narrative analysis itself was also difficult. The narrative analysis, my co-author had 10 people doing it. And they used, I can't, it says it in the book, I can't remember how many pieces of work that were used in order to represent, in order to extract the values that were appropriate to Donald Trump and Theresa May, but they're all specified in the book. I think it would be interesting to create new data for new individuals to find out how we can to find out what those personalities are. It should be straightforward because in some sense it should be easier with the questionnaire than it is with a narrative analysis.
I could comment, the power, Maurice, of your system is, for the first time I've seen the cultural and the social via agency, and the way you define agency as internalization of the perceived externalities. It is the true interactionism of self and the environment. And that's where I see cybernetics really hitting its pay dirt. So it's not necessarily the psychological side, it's the interaction between the value sets and the opportunities in the perceived opportunities in the environment, the cognitive structures of the environment, and the cognitive structures here, the perceptual structures. That interactionism is where your system is extremely powerful, because you've made a distinction between the cultural and the social and the resultant interaction.
It also allows me, it's in a sense, it's a unifying model, because if you read the literature, you've got emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, all the different behavioral intelligence, all the different intelligences, they actually come together in the model, and you can explain the relationships between these different types of intelligences. And what's more important for me is, you know, Piaget is my hero, and he was a cybernetician, though he never admitted it, didn't even know if he knew it, but he was. And his concepts of operative and figurative intelligence are really cybernetic processes.
What you're doing is taking Gardner's multiple intelligences, which diversified the world. You have to ultimately come into what is intelligence. And that is something that I see driving both William and yours concepts of agency as an interactive field between models. the model of the environment, the political ideas that can give you your perceptual field over here. That's powerful.
I've also, I think the penultimate chapter of the book, I spent some time talking to a man called Roy Frieden. Now, Roy is a mathematician. Actually, he works in physics, in optics, and he was involved in satellite recovery imaging. So he was looking at imaging of images that came back from photographs of stars or planets or what have you, and he needed to make sense of them. And he used Fisher information in order to do that. But he, in addition, set up a whole mathematics based on Fisher information. And I've got that in, I think it's chapter 14 of the book, because I spent a couple of years talking to him to work out, you know, my first degree was in math, stats, and computing. So I have a limited but basic understanding of mathematics. So I used, and in our conversation, I developed some of his ideas and applied it to exactly this modeling. And I'm currently in the process, and I've just had new conversations with him. He's in his 90s now. In order to try and work out von Forster's idea of stability within a Fisher information context. And it looks like it might work. It's a bit early days, but the chapter 14 of the book is concerned with what I call psychohistory. How do you predict what is going to happen? How do you involve personalities within contexts to try and find out what the conclusions are? What will happen with the mix of people and situations? So it's elementary. I don't know if it'll work. It's
you're really onto something, Maurice, because the concepts of a natural history of the morphology of our images, a natural history meaning how the structures are structured in interaction with the environment are structured. That was the real dream of Bateson, is to create a natural history of history.
Yeah.
What is the pattern that connects? You know, he talks about, you know, the lobster and the crayfish and you and me, etc. But those patterns that connect and disconnect.
Yeah.
That's what Boulding tried to do in his image, which no one's really taken very far. What you and William are doing are taking it much further.
Yeah. In the terms of my modeling, I'm what you call a patterner rather than a dramatist. So I try and find patterns, but I do that because I'm multidisciplinary. I try and pinch stuff from different areas and bring them together to see where they connect. And that's why the approach we called is a configuration approach.
Remy.
Hello, Maurice. So when I hear, so we're talking about second order cybernetics, and as I talked with Stuart, he said it's very important to recognize the observer as part of the system. So in your presentation, maybe I didn't capture, but you are the observer. And so how did you account for your own role, for your own personality, just for your self-reflective engagement? Did your colleagues, how did you solve that problem? While I mean, I don't know whether it's a problem, but to definitely acknowledge that your own projections are kind of part of the whole pattern, so to say. So how did you work through that issue in your writings?
Okay, well, I think what I tried to do in my Metacybernetics presentation the last time was try and move away from the importance of the observer.
Okay.
I think if you're discussing higher order cybernetics, you have to diminish that importance. So the way I've done it is very simply by looking at the psychological processes of internalization and explaining how that works. Because if you want, I'm imposing myself on an agency. I'm becoming one with the agency and saying, how would I internalize? Now, I internalize through, I accommodate the models that I create in my head as an observer, and I integrate them into me as my system. So they then enable anticipation to occur, because when I say, oh, if I move this stone from here to here, the following will happen. And the only reason I can say that the following will happen is because I've accommodated that model and is now part of me. The only way I can actually show that what I'm thinking will happen actually will happen is if I go and do it. Now, that's where stability comes in. Von Forster's stuff is very important in that sense. Piaget, he took it from Piaget because Piaget was talking about that. And he, in one of his papers, actually took a long quote from Piaget and explained how someone develops their learning process by looking, observing, and then re-observing, and then re-observing as an iterative process to make sure that what they're internalizing is actually what is out there in reality, using, of course, not constructivism, but critical realism.
So then I don't know whether there is enough time to respond to that. My next question was, because that's very much part of it, and that also gets maybe to Klaus's version of cybernetics, is I have blind spots. So if I go through the way you describe it, that I kind of stabilize, I'm actually stabilizing all the mistakes that I made, because I'm not a god outside the system. So what I need is I need to communicate with people who are able to see my own blind spots, and so how do you deal with that? So yes,
well, you're actually suggesting that, well, let's suppose I've got blind spots or psychological pathologies, which I do, we all have at some level. The only way I can find them out, because if I'm really lucky, I can recognize them, but then I repeat them because I don't recognize them until I've done them. Another way of doing it is to go to a psychiatrist, let him put me on the couch and he can help me through them. Is that what you're saying?
I'm actually trying to turn it to a methodological question. The way we construct it, if we kind of set up that is the relation between the model and the observer. And I personally think that what is called pragmatism is a methodology that tries to look at our theories have consequences or something. And so we're working in a set of theories with intended and unintended consequences, and the importance of acknowledging that we're like part of this larger narrative. And so then you can call it a pathology, but we can also say, well, there is nothing such as pathology. That's just an artifact created for the purpose of shutting up people. And so there are different sorts of questions being asked. But I think maybe Jason wants to.
I think so. Pathologies, often there are pathologies, they may be pathologies, but there are particular pathologies that may occur in the intelligences, in the autopoiesis